taxes.
Yeah.
So let's look at let's look at a couple of those. What's happened to property taxes in the last 8 years?
They've gone up significantly.
Why?
Why? I think there's two things that happened. We've put more burden on local governments to get things done. For a while, the state was trending in taking over more things onto the general fund to relieve property tax pressure. That trend has stopped and reversed. And then the second thing is the local government aids program, the direct credits and aids that the state pays to cities, counties, and to schools through the general education and other education formulas have shrunk. So you see around the state lots of voters passing referenda to increase funding for their schools, or without any vote at all, watching their property taxes rise because cities and counties have had to levy for things that the state tells them they must do with less aid.
Okay.
And I might add that I think the important thing here is that the property tax is a less fair tax.
Yeah.
It's really hard to gear the property tax to a person's ability to pay because it's tied to the value of the property. Now, for a young family, they may have overreached maybe to get that house.
Yeah.
Their income is really tight, but the tax is exactly the same as it would be for somebody in their middle age and probably prime earning years. And then, of course, you've got the problem of elders who might be on a fixed income, but they still got that house.
Yeah.
And so for that property tax to go up, it really hurts. So it's a very awkward way to get taxes on ability to pay.
Okay. Now let's take a look at the sales tax. Is that a stable form of revenue for the state of Minnesota?
It's more stable than the income tax, but it does fluctuate. And we heard, you and I both, kind of watch those forecasts that we get from the state Department of Finance, and they can tell when consumer consumption slows because of the recession. All kinds of sales are dampened, car sales go down, that sort of thing, and so sales tax receipts go down. So it follows, the business cycle pretty closely. So it's more stable than some, but it still fluctuates. And I think what we could do to stabilize it some would be broaden the base more.
Okay. So if you were one of the 22,000 state employees that lost their job,
laid off,
with the state shutdown, you're not going to be out buying a whole lot extra.
Well, right, and I know friends that even were holding back, a month before the shutdown because they were afraid that it might come to that. So consumers try to anticipate, and definitely loss of income. You tighten your belt and you don't spend for a while.
You have to make the house payment, probably a car payment.
Yep.
And child going off to college or university.
Oh man, that's another place where the finances of the state have changed a lot too. The amount of tuition the percentage of like the university's budget or the state university's budget that comes from tuition now, as opposed to public aid, is greatly increased. So families are really stretched for that college education, and students are taking more years to finish and leaving with a lot more debt.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about the income tax. Go back to Econ 101 or Political Science 101, the very basics. There's a progressive type of tax and there is a regressive type of tax. In the state of Minnesota, well, first maybe if you could tell us what those terms mean.
Oh, sure.
And then apply it to the state of Minnesota.
Progressive taxes means that a higher percentage of a person's income goes for taxes. And so if you have a progressive tax system, people at the upper end of the income scale will pay a bit more than the people in the middle, who will pay a bit more than the people who are making very little money. So the percentage rises slightly and gently over the income range.
It gets progressively higher.
Yeah, and the theory behind that is that every additional dollar that comes to a household means a little bit less.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're poor and your income goes up by $100, that means a lot to you.
Yes.
If you're a millionaire and your income goes up $100, you barely notice it. It has. Remember the marginal utility of consumption goods, that extra candy bar? It's
Yes.
kind of the same thing with income. So most tax experts say that you should strive to have a gentle positive slope in your tax structure. Regressive would be the opposite. A higher percentage of a low-income family's budget goes to taxes.
So what situation do we have in Minnesota with our tax rates for income?
It's regressive at the ends, and it's pretty flat in the middle. So in other words, low-income families, very poor families, pay a large portion of their income in their total tax burden, largely through property taxes when they pay rent and sales taxes when they buy anything other than food and clothing. Excise taxes, gasoline taxes, for example, extract a lot from poor households. And then at the very upper end, the wealthiest Minnesotans, it's also regressive in that they pay less than the upper middle class, if you will. But when you look at a chart of overall tax burdens over the whole range of incomes, I think the first thing you'd notice is that for most of the scale, it's pretty flat. It's a little over 12% for almost everybody. You pay more if you're poor, and you pay less if you're very wealthy.
But that 12% hurts the lower income people a lot more than middle income people, and then the upper income people are paying even smaller than that.
Right, and the lowest income households, that percentage is more like 20-something. It's a hard thing to measure because there's some statistical noise going on with the lowest income category because of people that file with business and farm losses and stuff. So it's a tough thing to nail down, but we do know from looking at sample household budgets that it is much higher than 12.
Yeah.
And then for the wealthiest, let's say 1%, the tax rate is actually under 10%. It's like 9.7. So it's 12, little over 12 for everybody, higher for the very poor, and lower, actually under 10% for the top 1% of households in Minnesota.
And JRLC has a nice little card.
We're both card-carrying
Yes.
tax fairness
It's probably too small to be picked up on camera, but this idea of tax fairness is all on a nice little card to put in your wallet.
Yeah, and people can go to jrlc.org and get the little, picture that is on the card.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I hear a little bit about Rusche, gambling as a form of revenue for the state. Is that a reliable source of income? If that were established, would that be a good source of income for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years?
Well, I'm glad you asked about the out years because I think that's where the real problem lies. The economic studies show that when you put in a new casino or a racino at a racetrack, you do have a small uptick in economic activity in the first maybe 1, 2, 3 years. But after about 3 years, the social harms start showing up, and by a ratio of, I think it's 4.7 to 1, the public loses on the deal because we're paying so much more in police and corrections and court costs, the social costs of bankruptcy, family violence, abuse and neglect, embezzlement, all that stuff starts showing up. Mm-hmm. And so to think that you can move ahead by relying on gambling income is as foolish as the gambler who believes they can take their last dollar and parlay it into a year's income.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a bad deal.
Now, in the current budget, we are required by our state constitution to have a balanced budget.
Right.
That is, the receipts and expenditures have to be even. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple ways to get in balance. We have a problem now because we're in the hole.
Yeah.
So you can cut your way out, you can tax your way out, or you can try to have some type of situation with both. Which approach is being led by the Republican state legislature? Which approach is being led by the DFL Governor Mark Dayton?
Yeah, the bills that the legislature passed off the floor and that the governor vetoed, with the exception of the ag bill, all the big bills, was an all-cuts budget. They completely solved the deficit by cutting back. And what we saw in that package were some really painful, I would say unacceptable options. 140,000 people left off of health care insurance, greatly restricting services for jobs and training, for welfare to work recipients, personal care attendant hours for people with disabilities. I mean, it was just almost a chamber of horrors to look at, what was being asked of some of the most vulnerable people to give up in this all cuts budget. Then the governor, of course, when he put his budget together, he did a fair amount of cutting too. And his first budget had some very painful reductions in child care area and some other things that we felt very strongly about. But he also mixed in some new revenues. So he used a bit of both. And so that's, at the very base, I guess, the impasse that we're still at today.
Yeah, so we're facing a no cuts versus a mix that is in flux a little bit.
Right.
Exactly what the mix will be. Okay, we just have a few minutes left, 3 or 4 minutes. So I want to switch gears completely before we end the program. Brian, the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition works with Minnesota AFL-CIO and the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce in judicial reform efforts.
Right.
In 2 minutes, why should people in Minnesota be concerned about election of judges, and what can we do about it?
Yeah. The main thing is that there have been a couple Supreme Court decisions, U.S. Supreme Court decisions, that have really changed the landscape.
Yeah, Americans United.
Yes, Americans United, and then also the series of White decisions that now allow judicial candidates to campaign just like legislators and governors and members of Congress. In other words, they can accept large amounts of money, they can run under party endorsement, they can tell people in public settings how they would rule on cases ahead of time. So we have this specter of having our courts become political, partisan institutions. We've seen this in other states.
State of Wisconsin.
Yes, indeed. Big money campaigns for judicial races, and it's in a way, I think the judiciary is kind of the crown jewel of our democracy. It's the place. It's like the last bastion where people should be equal under the law, and every citizen has the right to approach a judge with the expectation that that judge is fair and impartial and hasn't had anything on the outside in terms of campaign contributions that might influence his or her thinking. Now, there was a nationwide poll not too long ago of state district judges, state level district court judges, and it asked them around the country, what effect have campaign contributions had on your decisions? And 48% of them said it did have an effect.
Wow.
Yeah, that's scary. The second thing, and I'll say this real briefly, is that we have to have better elections for judges. Our vote needs to matter. I think, would do much better if we had some sort of public evaluation information about incumbent judges, and then could vote on whether to retain them or not. And then if we don't like a judge, vote them out, and then have the governor's commission on judicial selection.
Okay.
Give qualified judges to the governor to then appoint.
So AFL-CIO and the Chamber of Commerce and other groups,
A lot of groups.
JRLC,
Yep.
are supporting.
League of Women Voters, there's a whole bunch
Right.
of us. Yep.
So, Brian, our award-winning director, Roger Carlson, is about to cut his throat.
Uh-oh.
Or he's telling me that our time is almost up. Okay. Thanks to the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition and its executive director, Brian Rusche, for sharing some insights into the 2011 budget crisis and related issues. Minnesota State Retiree Council, AFL-CIO, is pleased to be able to sponsor such discussions. and we hope that you have gained some deeper knowledge about this crisis. As citizens, we need to make our legislators and our governor aware of how we feel and how we are concerned about our future. And we want to return to the proud statement of Minnesota, the state that works.